Today we are taking on the taboo topic of biohacking with one of the most well-known and controversial figures in the field, Joe Zayner. Joe is a biohacker, artist, and scientist who has faced numerous challenges, even threats to their safety due to their groundbreaking work in the field. Despite being banned from YouTube and facing investigation in California, Joe continues to push the boundaries of what is possible with DIY, genetic engineering, and self-experimentation. On this episode, we will be discussing the safety concerns, opportunities, and even DIY COVID vaccines with Joe. This is not a conversation to be missed. If you're a fan of cutting-edge technology and conversations and pushing the boundaries of what is possible, be sure to subscribe and like this video. Every bit helps. We are working towards putting out 2 to 3 episodes a week and have even more exciting content planned if we reach 10,000 new subscribers. Join us as we take on the world of biohacking on this episode of the Learning with Lowell show. So I've been familiar with work for some time, like biohacking and all these things. And there's like a parallel that I think of, and I'm just curious like what your take on it is. But does like biohacking and kind of like the repercussions, and it seems like I don't know how many other people get like hit as much for biohacking as you do in terms of like investigations and stuff. But it seems kind of like right to repair, you know, like people are fighting just for the right to repair their phones. And it seems like
biohacking, it is very similar, but you know, it's with the human body. So I think it's a little bit different. To me, what I like to say is, you know, my body, my choice. And usually when people hear that, they think about abortion or something like that, which is true, you know. But I think it encompasses more than that. I think it encompasses just a general, like, we deserve to have ownership of our bodies, which we don't currently in society. And that's crazy when you think about it, that like we can't decide what we want to do with or put into our bodies. And like that, like that's the one thing that is like solely possessed by us, you know, that nobody can really ever take away is our body, and government regulates it. So we can't do whatever we want to it. And that's kind of messed up, you know?
Yeah. And at the same time, like they're starting to, I think there's some pharmaceutical companies are starting to like patent different parts of our DNA, like different elements of it and stuff like that.
So
it's
DNA you can't really patent. So I think it was I forget exactly when, but they tried to patent, I think it was the BRCA1 gene, which is responsible for breast cancer. I think it was struck down by the Supreme Court or somebody like that. And the general rule is now, if it occurs naturally in nature, you can't patent it unless you're using it for a purpose. You know, you're patenting some process or technique instead of the actual gene. A good example of that is CRISPR, which is a modern genetic engineering technique. I don't know if you heard of CRISPR.
Mm-hmm. I've had George Rich on the podcast.
Oh, you have? Oh, cool. Yeah. And using CRISPR is just like a naturally occurring sequence in bacteria, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can't patent this. You can't patent the sequence of, you know, the Cas9 protein or something like that. You can patent the process though, like use this thing to do this. And that's what most people do. So usually naturally occurring gene sequences, you can't really patent nowadays, which is good. But I think the more scary thing is, you know, with all the human DNA sequencing and stuff like that, is insurance companies getting a hold of this and using it against us or other people. Right now it's against the law, but how long that lasts, who knows?
Yeah, it reminds me of Gattaca. I don't know if you ever have seen that movie.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's a really good movie, but it's really sad and dystopian at the same time. Where like you just get a blood test at the beginning of your life and that's your whole career for the rest.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's hopefully not where we're going with that stuff.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I'm really trying hard to do, and one of the interesting things is that you have a say in what happens, right? My company, the Odin, which I run here, is where I am right now, we sell genetic engineering kits to teach people how to do genetic engineering, you know, of all different organisms in their home, wherever. We want to give people a say in the genetic future of our world. Because if we just leave it up to the government and corporations, maybe something like Gattaca will happen. They're pretty crazy,
Yeah, they're not even consistent about it. Sometimes, I think I think we're about the same age, or like you're slightly older than me. But when we were kids, there were used to be insurance caps on how much the insurance companies would provide for you when you're sick. And it's like after like $1 million, they'd be like, all right, go find another insurance plan or die. But now they can't do that. Like something's changed. Some things stay the same. It's the health insurance is really interesting in the United States. I think I was reading one of your articles on Substack, if I remember correctly, and you're talking about how you're like how you see the future, or optionally how you see the future is like a hybrid model where there's like the big players, and I assume insurance feeds into that, as well as like biohackers who can be more decentralized and work on things as well. Are there places, if hopefully I'm like citing you right on that, but are there places like that in the world that are moving in that direction?
Well, so yeah, here's the thing. So like, the government has a place in drug regulation, right? Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to get companies to make drugs, number one, right? Companies have to profit to make drugs. So they're trying to get companies to make drugs and help them profit. They're trying to make drugs that help the most amount of people and hurt the least amount of people. And so pharmaceutical companies, they are just going by what the government has dictated. And this is what the government has dictated, right? We're going to help you make money, and we want you to make drugs that help the most amount of people and hurt the least amount of people. And they do that. It doesn't always work out, but like they do that generally. And the problem is that they make a fuck ton of money, and the drugs they generally make are geared towards them making a fuck ton of money, right? And helping a lot of people. But obviously, the market for just drugs like that isn't like infinite, and it's not very big at all, right? And so you have to think about, well, what about people who have rare diseases? Or what about people that there's no treatment for, right? And so you have to start thinking about, well, what about, are people willing to risk more? Or, are people willing to risk more for less expensive drugs or something like that? We don't take these things into account. So our system is meant to do one thing specifically. And don't get me wrong, people knock the US medical system, but like the US medical system is the one that is consistently outputting the most cutting edge drugs in the world, right? All these gene therapies that are coming out, most of them are developed and patented in the United States first, before any place else. So people in the US have access to these drugs that nobody else has. And it's crazy because there are many countries that don't have access, modern countries that don't have access to these drugs, right? And so it's like, it's not just our medical system that sucks. Every medical system has issues with dealing with medicine and drugs. But you have smaller countries where there's not really medical regulation, so it's like, it's more wild west like, but usually the problem with those countries is usually the standard of care isn't as high. So you're talking generally about countries like, the Dominican Republic maybe, or Colombia, or places like that where, they're not like, the countries do have some infrastructure, but they don't have the infrastructure like, the United States or Europe or places like that.
Yeah, there's a movie called Dallas Buyers Club where in the 80s in America, they didn't have many options for, I think it was HIV medication, like to help people not just immediately die from it. And so they would go down to Mexico, buy it up there, and then he'd bring it back north and he would sell it to people in a subscription model. At the same time, even nowadays, people go to Mexico a lot for dentistry because it's so much cheaper there. Like a $2,000 operation up here would be like $100 down there.
Yeah.
And it's just like right across the border.
I mean, medical tourism is the thing, right?
Yeah.
Like people do travel, buy drugs in Canada, and it's not just like the US, it's also people in other countries traveling places to get drugs and, surgeries and treatments and therapies. sometimes the wait list in other countries can be years for certain things, right? Especially if it's not it's not something that needs to be done immediately. And so it is a problem, and people do this a lot. There are websites right now that if you want to buy drugs directly from, India, a lot of drugs are manufactured in India and China. If you wanted to buy drugs, the same drugs that are used in the United States from the same manufacturing plants, you can buy them online. There are websites easy to find on Reddit, prescription drugs in India, search some stuff like that. And like I've done it before. It's harder to get more controlled substances, but any sort of general drug that's not really a controlled substance, it's pretty easy to get.
Is it this kind of is related to a topic I wanted to ask you about. When it comes to biohacking or just acquiring these things online, how do you know when something's safe? So like you at one point in time you made like a COVID vaccine and you administered it to yourself. How did you know that that wasn't going to cause a problem that you didn't foresee when there's not like a clinical trial or someone like testing the substance before you do it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was tested before. So when we had it manufactured, it came with like, all the tests they did, purity levels, all that sort of stuff. So as a scientist, a genetic engineer, I'm able to look at the data that they provide in the manufacturing process and analyze income. Generally, if you're buying drugs that aren't prepackaged, pre-made, you're going to run into a lot more of these issues. And that's where you have to have the knowledge yourself to be able to send off the drug, to have some analytical chemistry done on it, mass spec or something like that. But you can get just like prepackaged, pre-made drugs, pills that are just sold in other countries, like that are sold in Mexico or sold in the Dominican Republic or sold in these places. So the risk is much less. Could these drugs be contaminated or something like that? Sure, they can.
That makes sense.
That's always like a risk, but it's like, honestly, I think the fear of drug contamination is kind of driven by, is kind of propagandized. This idea that, we need to buy drugs from our country and not import them from elsewhere, right? It's why, why can't we buy drugs from Canada or Mexico? You think the Canadian government has laxer drug purity standards than the United States? That doesn't make any sense. Like, why would they have laxer, no, it's just our government is monopolizing the distribution of drugs so that the companies in the United States benefit the most from it. And it's kind of sad. Because the UK is not getting drugs that are more contaminated than the drugs we get in the United States.
Yeah, I wonder if there'll ever be like an EU type organization of like a NAFTA agreement, but for like drugs, so that you can like move them around and have like one standard that applies to everyone. I was recently talking to someone in the food sciences about how like if you get approved in the EU, you get like approved in like 50 different countries, if that makes sense. So I wonder if there'd be like something similar to that for pharmaceuticals or other drugs.
I think the problem is just the governments is that they're not willing to do this, And so it's just like you could easily, because usually when drug companies make a drug, they always go and patent it in like the same places. It's like the EU, Australia, the United States, China or wherever. They always patent the drugs in the same places and try to go through the regulatory, approval process in these same countries. And it's just like, it doesn't make any sense that they have to, right? It's like, if you get a drug approved in the United States, like the EU should also approve it. But, there's drama between governments on that shit. So they don't want that to happen, which is just like annoying because it's like, it doesn't help anybody.
Yeah. Well, so in terms of sourcing the material, I think that the answer is like, it's pretty easy. It's easy to know if it's a good product or not, I guess. And if any government body is listening, we're not recommending anything. But when it comes to biohacking, how do you on that component, how do you know if something's safe to put in yourself? Or is there an element of just like, yeah, this is a risk?
Well, I mean, there's always risk with stuff you do. And I think there's a risk with anything that you do. But I think what happens is, as a scientist or something like that, you can look at the data and understand or make an educated guess based on what you know to understand like how much of a risk is there, right? I think that's the big thing. And like, there's a risk with everything we do. There's a risk with driving your car or smoking a cigarette or drinking alcohol or something like that. There's risk with all that stuff. So I think it's just being able to analyze that risk and make a, proper judgment. And me understanding these things really well, if I experiment on myself or inject myself with gene therapy or something like that, I can make that proper judgment.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering if to what extent is it you take something that's more or less off the shelf and you're just translating it to the point where someone can build it in their lab, versus you're building something novel in your lab, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, both. I mean, the stuff I do is both, right? So the experiments I do are generally trying to create new, interesting things. I'm very well known for the experiments that I've done on myself, testing gene therapies, testing different medical treatments and stuff like that. As you said, creating a COVID vaccine, testing these on myself. So it's creating things that are usually novel, or if they're not novel, testing them on, myself is novel, is a novel part of the process. So I think that's not the only boundary that needs to be pushed. I think there's this lack of translation of things from like research paper or clinical trial into available to the general public. Who was it? Was it William Gibson? Did he say the future is already here, it's just not equally distributed? And I think that's a big problem in biotech and medicine, is that like, there are drugs that are available that can help people, but they have to go through a drug approval process, right? They have to be administered by certain people. They have to get insurance approval, like all this stuff before it actually gets to a human being. And that's a big problem because it slows it down a lot. It protects a lot of people, which is great, but it also slows it down a lot so that, not everybody gets what they need. And a lot of people die just because they're waiting on something.
Have you, so when there was, every now and again, there's like something that comes up and there's like a scarcity in terms of resources, like insulin, like a lot of people were literally dying because they couldn't get enough of it. Has there ever been a group of people just like that open sources the process to make insulin? Because at one point in time it was like dog liver, like they like munched it or something, and now you can make it with just yeah. Well, nowadays you can just make it with some like genetically engineered yeast or something.
Yeah, I think the problem with something like that is more understanding how much insulin you're injecting. Insulin is a tough one because you can actually kill yourself with insulin, right? And so just, as somebody who's a scientist, giving somebody the resources to make insulin is very empowering, but it's also very dangerous, because insulin is one of those few things that by itself in the body, even though it's naturally produced by our body, can kill us, right? If you inject too much insulin, you can kill yourself. And so you need it. you need to know more precisely how much insulin is in, some insulin that you purify or make or get in some way. Obviously, you can do things like, and you can buy tests to test how much insulin, or inject small amounts in yourself and see how it affects your blood sugar and things like that. But I think these things are generally way more complicated than would be reasonable for somebody just to have access to this technology. Can people have access to this technology? Sure, it's available. If you wanted to go and take the insulin gene, which you can easily look up online, and have some company produce DNA for you and put it in yeast or bacteria and, purify a bunch of insulin, like, it's totally possible. It is. But for me, like, making it easily accessible it's got its, positives and negatives. I think there are a lot of other things that are less harmful that would be, interesting, like gene therapies, for instance. Gene therapies are generally not very harmful. You're just putting some DNA or, some sort of DNA in your body. And generally, your body's not going to respond negatively to DNA because we have it in all of our cells. So it's pretty safe and it's interesting, and it has a lot of possible treatments for a lot of diseases.
Is there anything like the new mRNA type vaccines, not like the vaccine itself, but like the delivery mechanism? Is there any technology like that that's been coming out that you're excited to be experimenting with, either building into something that you tell Odin or just for fun and for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, mRNA technology, it's been around for a long time. It's not that interesting. It's not that much different than DNA. I mean, it's slightly different than DNA and slightly more efficient. But the problem with mRNA is RNA is much more degradable than DNA. And so, like with the vaccines, when the mRNA vaccines came out, they had to have these crazy freezers, cryo freezers, to store the vaccines. Because mRNA spontaneously degrades really fast, as opposed to something like DNA. So it makes it a much less hospitable thing to use outside of like purely clinical settings. It makes it much less accessible, and it's more expensive to manufacture, more difficult to manufacture, and all these things. So that's less as interesting. I think for me, the biggest things are accessibility and accessibility of the material. And right now that's just using like DNA plasmid-based gene therapies, which isn't as popular as I imagine it should be.
Why isn't it? Like, what do you like about them?
It's really inexpensive to produce DNA generally, and it's very stable. The problem is it's less efficient than standard gene therapies, which use viruses. So it's usually not people's first choice. If you're going to do expensive pharmaceutical experiments, people usually shy away from it because it has it's less likely that it'll work.
Makes sense. Is there a unique, so let's say what type of disasters would biohacking be particularly useful to be used to help resolve? Like in pandemics, you kind of need like a governing body, for instance. But at the same time, there was like an Ebola outbreak, which was kind of
so. I think that in the pandemic, it would have been great. We created this DNA vaccine, administered it before any vaccine was available to the general public, right? Like, this was in mid 2020, and vaccines weren't available to the general public till early 2021.
Yeah.
So you imagine people having this ability to do something like this, because the problem is like distributing a vaccine to, 100 million people takes time. And it did, you're talking months and months and months. And even then it cost a ton of money and logistically was crazy. Right. And so you're talking about like, if we could have systems or things in place in which we can, make vaccines in response to outbreaks, it would be great. The problem is the only thing you can do that with really is DNA. mRNA is really hard to make and produce and distribute, but DNA can be produced almost anywhere. It's really easy to distribute, really easy to manufacture. So having a DNA manufacturing facility in each state that, in case of a pandemic, can pump out a vaccine within, weeks of an outbreak starting would be, as you can imagine, pretty amazing.
Why? I thought the reason that they did the mRNA versions of the vaccines was because they were fast. So DNA would have been as good
No,
as
not
fast.
at all. mRNA, I mean, they had to do proprietary manufacturing with the mRNA. They didn't even have the capacity to do it. That's one of the things that slowed it down a lot, was just that, trying to produce this quantity of mRNA vaccines at scale. That was really difficult. Yeah.
Was yours? This is one of the when I was reading about back in 2020. I was like, I wonder how long it would be effective, because that's one of the things that people have been. There's like boosters now for the mRNAs.
Yeah.
Did you do antibody tests over like 3, 6, 9 months to see how long they lasted in your system? I know you had an antibody response, I think.
Yeah, we had an antibody response. Not just an antibody response, but we did a pseudoviral neutralization assay, so we had a neutralizing antibody response. This is the problem with the vaccines, is like, I imagine that there was some portion of the population that didn't even have an antibody response to the vaccine that was high enough to cause a response, much less a neutralizing antibody response. Because the way antibodies work are basically that, they inject you with this vaccine and your body mounts a defense, right? And basically what it is creates antibodies that target this protein. Now, where on the protein it targets is random. It's not completely random, but there's some amount of randomness to it. They're not putting the virus in you, they're just putting this protein, right? And so when the actual virus that has this protein comes in you, if the part of the viral protein that helps it get into your cells isn't the one that the antibody is binding, your antibodies aren't going to work. Your antibodies will just bind some random part of the protein that doesn't affect the virus at all. And the virus still works. So even though people got vaccinated, very few people actually got tested for an antibody response, which I think is a huge issue, right? Because we don't know how many people had antibody responses that were neutralizing to the virus, right? And so it's like, who knows? And these boosters and all this other stuff, it's it's like they look at the efficacy of this stuff, and as the virus mutates and changes, and a different virus becomes, the more prominent one in the population, the old, vaccine doesn't work as well because your antibodies don't bind the new virus as well. And they tried these bivalent vaccines that didn't even work that great. And it's just like, the whole thing is a very complicated experiment that we don't quite understand how to combat yet.
Determining the mRNA efficacy? Like how
just the vaccines in general, on the scale. Just pumping out a new vaccine and getting it to people and getting it to work and seeing what works. And so it's just like, are boosters, like how many boosters are still going to help people? At what point is it just going to be like,
Mm-hmm.
and you look at the flu vaccine, right? So they make a new flu vaccine every year for which strains they think will feature most prominently. And sometimes the efficiency of the flu vaccine is like 20%.
Yeah.
Right?
I never get it. I just think it's a waste.
I mean, it depends who you are, right? What portion of the population.
Yeah, for me. Asterisk.
Yeah, it's definitely like with the COVID vaccine for people over a certain age, like it's definitely something that is helpful. But yeah, the flu vaccine, it's, and so like these things are complicated, they're hard. And I think pitching it as an easy science problem that's easy to solve, I think was one of the big failures of COVID. It's just like, we figured it out. Here's this vaccine. And it's like, no, we realize that it's more complicated than that. And we have to be prepared in the future for something that's more complicated. And I don't think it's going to be as easy as just like, let's run a clinical trial. Imagine if COVID was like slightly more deadly and slightly faster.
Yeah, that was one was scary. Yeah. It was like a couple of years before, there was a movie called Contagion. And then when COVID was hitting off, I was like, oh, how'd they know? Matt Damon's in this. He needs to stay out of movies. He's just, it's like, it felt too real.
They're not going to be like, wear a mask. Like, come on. Like, we need to figure out something better than that.
That's what we did during the Spanish flu. Like 100 or so years ago, we just said mask up and good luck.
And so it's just
yeah, our technology has not evolved in terms of prevention.
Yeah. And, right before the pandemic, it's funny actually, because in like late February of 2020, I was actually at the NIH in Washington, D.C. and went to this like closed door meeting with a bunch of like high up people in the government, in all branches of the government, Army, Navy, Special Forces, CIA, FBI, whatever, everything, talking about biosecurity and biothreats. And it's funny how ill-prepared everybody is for this stuff. Just like a virus being released, like monitoring systems and stuff like that. Just how we aren't even prepared to monitor for this stuff. And it's funny because like COVID, I think, was mentioned once the whole time. And I don't even know if I should be talking about this stuff, but don't come after me, government.
Yeah, it's not like they'll investigate you.
COVID was mentioned once like the whole time, and it wasn't even like that big of a deal. And then like a week later, everything gets shut down. So that's showing you like the state of like biosecurity understanding of our government. It's so bad. It's so bad.
Yeah. Was there, did they mention if they funded gain of function research? Because there was a fun interview with Fauci where the guy just kept yelling at him about that, which I still don't know if they did or not. Like it's
funny. Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is it's like there's no like it's like is a burrito a sandwich,
Yeah, is a hot dog a sandwich?
Yeah, a hot dog or something like that. Is it a sandwich, well, it has like two pieces of bread, right? And you like put something in the middle and you eat it, right? And I think it's something similar like that, the whole gain of function research argument. The papers that were published that came from, that had funding from the NIH or NS, whatever, AID, NIAID. The research that they did was to modify viruses and measure the results. And in some cases, those modified viruses, the function of them made them more virulent. or, was that gain of function research? I don't think they were specifically trying to make the virus more virulent in this research, but they did. So it's like, it's like, is a hot dog a sandwich? It's like, well, it ended up being gain of function research by the fact that they did some research and something gained function. But I don't think that was the goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What is your pet theory on if it was from a lab or not? I like I think it's like Bill Maher or something. He did this bit where they were asking him about where the COVID strain came from, and he just kept saying, why don't we ask a viral lab in the province it was found? Oh wait, there is one. It's called the Wuhan Viral Clinic for COVID, stuff like that. But do you have a pet theory for what happened?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's impossible to tell. And I think that's the funny part is whether you say it isn't or it is, there's no way to tell, right? It's impossible to go back and say without finding evidence, somebody wrote down, we did this experiment and we had this thing, which I imagine all that stuff is burned by now, you're never going to find that information. It's impossible to tell. And so the things that people are saying are just it definitely, you definitely can't say it 100% came from a lab or 100% didn't come from a lab. And I think that's the problem, is that people are getting into these narratives where it's yes, it 100% didn't come from a lab or something. And you can't say that. Even if it looks exactly like a virus you found in nature or something like that, you can't say that, because modern genetic engineering techniques allow you to modify things such that you could never tell the difference. Right? You could never say that was definitely genetic engineered or that definitely wasn't. And so, I don't know. I don't know if it was or it wasn't. Yeah. It's a lot harder to make things and, make a virus that will infect a lot of people, get it into the general population and have it infect a lot of people, and then have it spread. That's complicated. That requires a lot of things to go improbably correctly. Can it happen? Sure. Did it happen? I don't know. Right? So I think both theories have things going against them.
Yeah.
And so it's just
I'm in the same boat. It's I don't know what to think. The thing that doesn't help them is that they did the same thing with SARS, where they did leak that at one point in time. So it's if you repeatedly leak something, it's I don't know, I'm gonna look at you differently. It's every day you walk down the street and you happen to pickpocket someone, and there's a pickpocketing in the neighborhood, I'm gonna look at that person first.
Yeah,
sure, I don't know if this is natural, if they lost it or not. But yeah, who knows? It'll be fun if anyone ever reveals it, a true crime documentary or something from China.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody will ever, like I said, I think, any sort of evidence of anything happening has probably long been destroyed. Anybody would be ridiculous to have kept it, if you're the Wuhan Institute of Virology, they don't have anything that no, they burned it all a long time ago, I imagine. So it's all just from here on out going to be complete conjecture.
Is there something is it a lab leak or not in the biological space thus far in history, that you would be curious, if you could get the answer to it, it would make you happy? In the future, it could be oh, if I could do this type of technology, that's an easy thing. But yeah,
I think the thing is the whole RNA world hypothesis, that the world, that DNA or organisms evolved from RNA. The first macromolecule that instigated life was an RNA molecule. There is no evidence to back this up. is a hypothesis that was created by scientists because they surmised that during the conditions that we predict were on the early Earth, these chemical reactions could have taken place that could have created some RNA molecules, which then could have led to more RNA molecules being created and chemical reactions in life. But there's zero evidence, like you can't prove it, right? Because nobody can go back to the early Earth, and like, at least not right now. Maybe when we have time travel, but right now nobody can. And so like, it's just this weird, wild guess that people have that is based on little more than, some hands waving.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Einstein said that you could look into the past, but you just couldn't go there. Like, so we could have like a giant magnifying glass that pierces time.
I'm okay with that either way, because my idea is that, or the competing hypothesis is that proteins were the first molecules, not RNA. And they're abundant. Amino acids are abundant in the galaxy. They're very abundant. And so, you have these two competing hypotheses. It's kind of like the lab leak and, natural evolution theory. And you'll never be able to know, at least not until like we create our own worlds, which will be really cool. But I imagine that's, a good million years in the future or so.
Mm-hmm. Or until we get this giant magnifying glass that I'm talking about. It's not called a magnifying glass. That's stupid. It's like the Einstein-Rosen bridge is what it is, to look back in the past.
Well, I mean, it'll probably be a good, 500,000, a million years before we get that.
I think the major constraint is power. Like, we need a lot of energy to do it. I think that's what a physicist was saying. We just like fired a laser that kind of did something good the last couple of weeks, so that's kind of cool. So we're getting closer to fission.
Closer.
No, fission or fusion, I forget which one.
Yeah.
I don't know how you there's like one that's fusion, which is for nuclear stuff, and there's fission that's the inside of a sun, and I always get those two confused. I'm sure there's like a guy out there that knows the Latin, and it's like one means like donkey and the other one means like chicken or something, and it's like obvious. But when you like, I'm generally curious. So when you inject things in yourself, does it ever hurt? Like, so I was reading about one of your things about how you were like shoving a biocompatible polymer into yourself or something, and I was like, man, that sounds painful. But didn't that hurt? But you just like in the article, you were just like, oh, this felt weird. And it's like, is weird the word, or is it?
Yeah, no. I mean, these things do hurt for sure.
Okay, I was like, man, you
but
just
I think
made
it's like, there's like acceptable forms of pain, and there's non-acceptable forms of pain generally, right? You let other people punch you in the face, you get paid to do it in boxing, or you do CrossFit and you can't walk for a week because you exercise your legs so hard. That's a approved form of hurting yourself. I think it's really similar, except the goals, I think, are to provide more knowledge, or in some way experiment using the scientific process and understand the world, understand ourselves, and understand these whole things. So I think it's the goal that pushes me, just like anybody else, whether you're whatever way you're hurting yourself, the goal that pushes you. I mean, I don't know if you have tattoos. I have plenty, but tattoos
Not
hurt.
yet.
Yeah. I mean, some people say they don't hurt, but they're just lying.
They say it's addicting.
Hurt.
Yeah, they say it's addicting. Like, it's a good pain.
I don't know. To each their own, but it definitely hurts. And it's like, that's like a socially acceptable form of hurting yourself. And so I think it's just some of the stuff I do sometimes isn't necessarily socially acceptable because nobody else really does it. But if it were in the confines of a hospital or something like that, it would be much more socially acceptable. It's just that like I'm doing it outside traditional venues.
Yeah. Well, my concern's not for social convention because I don't really care about society all that much. I just more was wondering, like, to what extent is this like the exploration harmful to you? You know, like, is it a momentary pain? Does it go away, you know, a little bit? It sounds like they just go away out over time. Like, you shove yourself with a COVID vaccine, it just goes away. Yeah. I just care
Generally, I
about
haven't done
well-being stuff.
anything that had serious long-term effects.
That's
Or
good.
anything like that, at least that I know about.
You have two heads. You just don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there could be something on the molecular level that I can't see, you know, that like shows up later. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just like, you know, if you look at like the first people who flew planes or went to space, there's some amount of crazy there, right? And people have died in the pursuit of knowledge in many different ways. And I think for me, you have to balance like the crazy and like the reasonable, right? Like, this is what I know, and this is the risk I'm willing to tolerate. So let me balance these so that I'm not taking more risk than I know I can reasonably tolerate. But, you know, sometimes you need people who are willing to push those boundaries a little bit more, you know, because it pushes humanity forward, you know, like people going to outer space, like that shit was crazy.
Yeah, there's a guy who fell asleep on the rocket. He was like, it was John Glenn. He would literally fall asleep. He didn't care at all.
Yeah.
Like, some people are just born different. They're just real explorers.
It's just like, but that is like, you know, it's really beneficial to society and humanity. And I think providing people these opportunities, I think in the medical system, as we talked about earlier, is something that I think would be very beneficial, right? We need to allow people to take risks that they're willing to take and tolerate a little bit more risk in our medical system so that people who need treatments can try out some cutting edge stuff. And the knowledge that we get from them trying this stuff out can benefit everyone, you know?
Yeah. As long as there's consent,
so many
people really understand.
Yeah. I've met so many people who were dying, who had terminal illnesses with no treatment. And, you know, they would have liked nothing more than to test out treatments on themselves, whatever they could get their hands on.
Are you familiar with the movie A Beautiful Mind?
Yeah, sure. You know, about John Nash or whatever.
Yes, with Russell Crowe, which is also what I name every crow I meet. But when you're doing all these things, you know, like visiting the government and whatnot, do you ever wonder, like, oh, this is evidence, like I might not all be here? Like, because I was talking to my wife about this last night, and I was like, you know, if aliens picked me to be their, like, well, we need you to translate for the rest of the world, I would just sit down and be like, just wait until Amy comes home and she can help me, like, because clearly I'm having a psychotic break. But like, you're like doing all these really cool things, but you know, you're just a Midwesterner. Does it ever like you ever just worry like you're the beautiful mind guy and no one's told you the little girl doesn't exist?
It's really hard because sometimes when nobody else understands what you're doing at a certain point, or there's very few people who understand what you're doing, it's hard to position yourself in regards to like safety, in regards to like cultural, social acceptance and significance and all these things. So it's easy to get to that place where it's like, you know, I used to rock climb, and sometimes when you get up so high and you're standing against the wall and you look in every direction, you can just see rock, right? Because like, as far as you can see in every direction, you just see rock. You get kind of a vertigo because you it's hard to position yourself in the world, right? You don't know. It's like when you're underwater, sometimes it's hard to position yourself, like what's up and what's down. If you like spin around underwater and open up your eyes, right? Or keep your eyes closed, you have no idea where you are. And it's kind of similar. You don't really have a frame of reference for like if you've actually gone crazy or if what you're doing is sound and knowledgeable and reasonable, because there's nobody else who's doing these things. There's nobody else who understands these things to the level you understand them. And so it can get really scary, and it can definitely be at the point where you're just like, have I lost it? Like, am I crazy? Or like, am I actually like reasonable human being right now?
Yeah. Especially when, people yell at you and say, hey, maybe don't do those things. It's like, it's like if everywhere you go, people are assholes. It's like, am I the asshole? I wonder that sometimes. If I'm having having one of those days, you ever have one of those days where like everywhere you go, like someone's being a jerk, like someone's cutting you off or whatever. So when I notice it, I always think, oh, I'm probably in a bad mood. I need to like chill out, like, like read a book or something.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a bad hypothesis, but yeah, it's true, But the thing is also that people don't make great changes in the world by doing the thing that everybody else does.
Yeah.
Right? In order to have some big impact, you have to do something nobody else is doing, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't have as big impact. Everybody would be doing it, right?
Yeah, it'd be easy.
And so that's also like a big truth that's hard to live with, because it's like, it is like you're doing something new and different. So there's going to be some amount of pushback generally, which is annoying, because it's just like, especially the stuff I do, like trying to bring people body autonomy and medical choice and understanding of, modern medicine and genetic engineering and all these other things. To me, I view that as something that is like noble and honorable and like helpful to humanity. And you get all this pushback from it, and you're just like, why? Like, what are we fighting against? Are we fighting against knowledge? Like, that's crazy. Yeah. And it can be really hard at times, because it's just, I want to do something that there's not like so much pushback from, like I want to be like a professional StarCraft player or something.
Yeah.
I guess people don't play StarCraft anymore, do they?
No, there's people make hundreds of thousands of dollars off of StarCraft. StarCraft.
Oh yeah.
StarCraft 2? Yeah, there's some tournaments where you can make like, there's certain teams that make millions of dollars. I'm going to be interviewing one of the teams. I want to learn more about it because it seems crazy. Yeah, I'm going to be interviewing one of those teams, and then like ice skating, because Amy and I've been really getting into watching people do ice skating. I don't know why, but it's like they throw people around, and it feels like they should die. Like there was a person.
It's pretty ridiculous.
Who like spun a lady, and her head was like this far off the ground. And I was like, how many times did she get domed before they got that right?
When they practice, do they wear helmets? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. There's a TV show called Smallville, and in it, every now and again, people realize who Superman is. They're like, oh, wow, you're Superman. And then they usually get like hit on the head with so they get amnesia. And we joke about the end of the series. The reason no one recognizes him because everyone has concussions. They just don't even know anymore. But it does sound with, in relation to you at least, there's like a little bit of like courage in what you do. Like there's the fears there, but you're able to overcome it. Like with rock climbing, I probably like if there was like a rock climbing situation in front of me, I would hope you're just nearby and I could just kind of like tag you're it and let you take that on. But at the same time, like you're like constantly overcoming so many different things where most people be like, oh, well, okay. Like most people like they face one hurdle in between where they are now and versus where they want to go. They kind of get dejected by it, especially if I don't know what your family life or like your role models growing up. But most people don't like. I can't imagine there's many people that were like injecting themselves with things when you're growing up. No. But like if someone's doing something weird, like one of the hardest one of the hard elements is that like there's no one around to like pattern your life off of. Like when
Yeah,
like
it is.
you're the Joe that people look up to now. They're like, oh, I'm gonna do what this
Yeah,
person's
no, it
doing.
is. And that's hard because you you are in this place where you're just like, you know, it's something that I've thought a lot about lately because it's just like, what kind of life do I want to live? Who do I want to be? Because you can kind of lose yourself in that because you're kind of dictating who you are and like what you're doing and all this stuff, which could be a good thing, but it also can be a bad thing because like society has certain standards and like patterns and things we do because it's beneficial to all of us. It helps us all get along. It helps us all work together and stuff like that. And you can, I think, push yourself too far outside of society to where like you ostracize yourself. And that's just, it's not good for you. You know, it's not good for me. It's not good for other people because generally you want to find this balance of like, you can be part of society, but also push the boundaries. It's one thing hard with the COVID vaccine, you know, or a lot of the stuff we do. It's getting to the place to a certain extent where it's so advanced, it's so outside the norm that people don't really understand it or don't believe it. And the impact it can have on society and culture is just like so diminished because like, you know, people are just like, I don't really get it. You know, making a COVID vaccine in your fucking kitchen before any was publicly available, testing it on ourselves. Like, to me, that's one of the greatest things of, you know, 20th, like at least the past 5 or 10 years that anybody has ever done. Anybody, yet society doesn't see that way because they don't understand it. They don't like the idea that somebody could create a functional vaccine themselves, test it on themselves using proper scientific techniques and protocols in their kitchen or in their home. Like, and so it's like, how do I bring this back? How do I make this more accessible to people, more understandable to people? And that's a hard thing to do. You know, it's kind of like a completely different goal than just like, what's the most advanced and crazy thing I can do? Because that's what it used to be. But now it's like the things I can think of and want to do are just like so far out there that I think it wouldn't hit. It would just be like, what the fuck? What?
Well,
Yeah.
there is an argument to be made for like keeping other people inspired in what you're doing, but maybe it's like in doing those crazy things you'd inspire them more. Like there'd be like sometimes that's one of the reasons why I like the show is like people have listened in, heard someone talk passionately on something, like, oh, I didn't know coding could be like that, I didn't know CRISPR could be like that, I didn't know biohacking could be like that, and they go out and try it, and now their whole life just changed because of
Oh, for
the
sure.
passion behind it. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
no, for sure. It is. And it's just like, it's more complicated. Like when I first approached all this stuff, I just thought about like, how can I do, you know, push the boundaries of science and genetic engineering. I just thought one level deep. And now it's like, I'm trying to think 4 or 5 levels deep. Like, not just how can I push the boundaries, how can I affect more people? How can I, you know, push society more towards a goal? How can I get more people involved, inspired, like all these things? And so it just becomes a different problem to solve that is more difficult because to me, science is the easy part. You know, that's like my, you know, like piano for Mozart. Like genetic engineering is just something that I can just see and play and like, you know, molecular biology, I can just see it. I can see like deep into it. But it's more complicated than that. It's like translating that for other people and helping them, you know? also be able to see these things.
I could see you being like somewhere in between like a Mr. Rogers and Carl Sagan, like educating people in that type of show. You have a really nice voice. I think the three people will go for it. You got the background for it. Yeah. And then the news would help sell it for you.
If anybody is listening, and they want to give me a show to do.
Well, you can make it yourself. I mean, YouTube's pretty cheap. Yeah, you just need production equipment. I know some filmmakers. I could I'm
not against it, but it's figuring out what to invest my time right now. And
is that a big reflection?
I'm banned from YouTube. By the way,
you're banned? I thought it was like just for that one episode. I thought like the one episode was banned because you were showing people. They just were like, "We hate you, go away." Okay.
Yeah, because what we did when we created this COVID vaccine, we live streamed the whole process. We tried to be as transparent as possible, so that when people wanted to know about it, we could just say, "Well, if you don't believe us, just go watch the video." So every experiment we did, every test we ran, we live streamed the whole thing so that people could see us actually like testing our blood samples and like doing the experiments. So that there was like some amount of transparency, which we don't see in the pharmaceutical industry at all, ever. And YouTube permanently banned me for life for trying to teach people how to make a vaccine in their home.
Yeah, that's weird. I mean, what is the difference between doing that and just reading a paper in a very detailed way with graphics?
Right.
Like, they accept that. Sometimes I wonder to what extent did someone do something wrong versus like you're just kind of like a big name and people are hitting you. Like with investigations and stuff like that. It's like, do people actually think you're doing something wrong, or they just want
reporting? Everybody goes on, watch the video, and they're like, "Oh, this asshole! I'm going to just report."
Yeah. Well, there's Twitter now. Apparently, that's free speech and all that over there. I don't think Elon's going to buy YouTube, but he was doing a town hall thing where he said he wants to do like YouTube things on Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter definitely needs more video. I mean, that's where things are going, Anyway, or pictures. Words are great, but like.
Yeah. And you do art stuff too as well. Like you did some art installations, and you made a piano type thing that will like respond to DNA. I was trying to find images of it, but I was too stupid. I couldn't find it.
Yeah, chroma cord. It's actually like right. Yeah, I think it's hard to see, but it's kind of like that black and orange
in the middle one
thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would carry that around wherever I would go if I were you too. Like, you bring employees in, it's like, and this is the thing I randomly invented. Like, okay, I'm going to listen to you more.
No, yeah. So a lot of the work I do, I see as a form of self-expression. Because it's interesting how science tries to be devoid of bias and expression. When it's completely not. It's impossible for anything to be free of bias. And scientists like to pretend like they are. But to me, like the experiments I do are like a way that I can express things that are inside of me in some way, whether, it's the COVID vaccine or whatever. It's expression of who I am as a person. And I see my work as more of performance art than I do as science. That's why I like to record a lot of it, or I like to make it, like interfaceable with humanity, as opposed to just like writing a scientific paper and putting that online. Like that is not a way to interface with people. That, that it loses so much. And so I try to figure out ways in which I can turn science into a form of self-expression so that people can experience it the way I experience it.
That's a pretty compelling defense for how to get away with any legal problems you have moving forward. Just like, this is art. I think there are people who've literally obstructed traffic before and like done things. And they're like, oh, I'm just doing art. So they don't get in trouble for it.
It is true.
It's protected.
It is true. It
Have
is.
better lawyers. You should get better lawyers. They should have identified that as your strategy. Just lean in that and all your things. Like they ask you about COVID. It's like, well, first of all, I see this as art. This is performance. And then you go to talking about it. No one can ever attack you again because it's art.
I think the hard part is the art consists of really advanced science, and so there's this where like art and artists don't always consider the things they do art, and science and scientists don't consider the things they do science. So it's like this weird thing that's just like very unique to my mode of doing things that I do. And so it's difficult because there are some of my works, like the musical instrument that I created that uses engineered proteins inside of it, and things that I've designed, a number of art pieces, more like new media art pieces that have been in museums and stuff like that. I've been in a lot of museums, but most of my work isn't like, it's hard to show at a gallery or like, because it's like me live streaming myself on YouTube doing an experiment or something, right? It's not very traditional in the art world. And so most of the things I do are in this very weird middle ground.
I went to the Chicago, one of the big marble with little lions on it, the art museum there. Yeah, and there was a person who had like
Art Institute in Chicago.
I'm glad you know. I just know it's art building. I'm sure it's like near like the giant.
Everybody in the Midwest knows that, right?
Yeah,
it's just for the artists.
Well, I went in there once, and there was like something made out of popsicle sticks, and they were saying that was art. And I was like, that just looks like someone glued a bunch of popsicle sticks together. I think I should go to something more dumbed down for me to appreciate. But I think it could work. Like if you just made like a diorama, you took the live stream and then like made a diorama or something out of it, kind of like something from Community, and they're never-ending dioramas. I feel like there's an avenue here. If someone out there can understand how to legalize this, so Joe can just do whatever they want to do, that'd be great. Because I'm sure to some extent you're being limited in your expression because of these.
My expression is mostly limited by society, I think.
We should ignore society.
A lot of times, I think society isn't ready for things that I want to do. And so it's like, that's a huge, you don't think about this a lot. Most artists probably are just like, do art. But to me, some things are just like too ahead of what people believe and understand and think about. For instance, an art project I was thinking of doing around embryos. So currently there are laws. I don't know if there are laws or regulations around how long you can grow a human embryo outside of the womb.
Yeah, it's like 12 days, right? It's like, it's not that long.
It's something like that. It's like 12 or 14, somewhere around there, some arbitrary number that was selected. And it's strange because, most of the people who run these scientific things are the same people who support abortion, right? Are the same people who think that like a 7-week-old, fetus or whatever isn't a living being. And it's really contradictory to me. And it's really held back scientific research a lot. And so I want to take an embryo and grow it and do an experiment to see how long I can grow it outside of a womb. Set up an art exhibit, an installation, right? it's like a big room in the middle of a museum that has microscopes and everything trained on the embryo, so people can come in and watch it as it develops over the course of its life. How long can it last? I don't know. You know, it depends on tissue development and things like that. I mean, generally you're talking about days at this point in time, you know, maybe like 20 days or 30 days. Who knows? You know, there's some projects I've been working on to, overcome some of the problems of this artificial womb, embryo development outside the womb. But like doing an art piece like that, having an embryo grow and then die in front of everybody, like the backlash on that would be insane.
I think, maybe that's a good thing. It's good to pick fights every now and again, especially if you're doing like a fundraising or something, because then the people who like what you're doing are going to come say hi and give you some money. I was recently watching a Jordan Peterson interview, and he said he said whenever he pisses people off, he makes more money because then the people who do like him support his Patreon. It's like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. The thing is like, I don't want to live my life like that. I don't want to live my life constantly having to be in conflict with the world. I mean, again, look at Jordan Peterson. He himself has admitted he has severe, mental health issues, checked himself into mental health institutions or rehab and all these places. He deals with a lot of shit. It's not a way to live for anyone to live their life just to like stir up controversy all the time. It's like, I don't want to be hated or have people angry at me. Like nobody does, right? I want people to enjoy me and be interested in the things I do. Like everybody, like you, I imagine also, it's like okay to be controversial sometimes, but like, I just want to be like a Big Mac, it's like nobody hates the Big Mac.
Probably people trying to lose weight hate Big Macs.
They also love it,
Yeah, well, I don't know. I worry about the concept of trying to please everybody. I think, as long as you're happy and the people who love you are happy, I think society can probably get punched in the face. I mean, society for the longest time thought that like homosexuality was an illness. So, I mean, maybe they don't get a vote sometimes.
No, I agree. But I think also it's like, and I do try to be myself and live my best life. But also it's like fighting all the time isn't possible.
It gets tiring.
Yeah, it does. And sometimes you don't want to fight. Sometimes you just want to like exist in the world and be beneficial and like live and not constantly worry about the hate you're going to receive. And I can be really controversial at times just because of who I am, not because I'm trying to even be controversial, just because like of the things I've done and the experiments I've done, which like on face value aren't controversial, like making a COVID vaccine is not controversial. But once it enters society places some meaning to it outside of just the meaning that it has, that a COVID vaccine was created. And it becomes controversial. And that's hard for me because it's just like, I just want to create things. And sometimes those things end up causing controversy.
In ancient times, when Rome would come into contact with different civilizations, like with India, they would find that the Indians didn't care about silver. And so they would just start getting as much silver as they can. And the Indians would be like, oh, this is not that much. And they value this, so they just kept like doing the exchange. But eventually the Indians started appraising silver higher, and it became their standard of currency as well. And so I wonder to what extent like there's like society in terms of like the internet, just like maybe like evil people that are living in basements, and like like they could be just being mean to you, and then it's like offsetting like what actual society is like no one actually cared about silver in India. They were happy with like clamshells or what the heck it was. But then like the Romans and their silver.
With me, unfortunately, it's not just the internet, it's also the government,
Yeah, that's fair.
I've been harassed by the government, not just like the federal government, which has, the FDA and the FBI. It's also state governments like the state of California and the California Medical Board. And it's not just in the US, also the German government. And, it's also companies, social media companies come after me.
Wow.
Payment
Yeah,
processors. My business uses payment processors to charge credit cards. Payment processors have shut us down because so it's if it was just random people on the internet,
that's fair.
I might be okay with it. But it's reached a much greater place in my life to where my job, my business, me being in jail or not, it's like affected so much, and that makes it much more difficult to just keep doing it, because sometimes like I don't want to go to jail.
Yeah.
I don't.
It's a sad place. Yeah.
And so it's like,
unless you're in Norway, then it's nice.
Yeah, I know, right? That's what I hear. But even then,
Oh, go ahead.
Pardon?
Oh, you were gonna say something, then I think I cut you off.
Oh, I said even then, like I still don't want to spend time in jail. I still have loved ones that I care about, people I want to be around.
Yeah, are these threats still existing? I was under the belief, I thought it's like in the beginning, like people were just mean to you, and then over time, the governments and stuff are like, oh, we know who this person is. They're good people. We're gonna be nicer to them moving forward. They're still.
I've talked with more people. Most recently, it's been less government involvement. As early as 2019 was the last time I was seriously harassed by the government. And then since then, it's been more companies, actually. Payment processors, social media companies, places like that. And so it's just, I feel like switching a little bit. Yeah. So
how do you
still anyway.
What are you doing now to protect yourself? I was going to ask you about the fan mail convicted rapist and generally how you protect yourself, but this is probably related. Like, if all these things are coming at you, you don't seem like too beaten up by it, but maybe on the inside you're crying more. But like, how are you? Like, what are you doing to stay safe when all these things go on? Not just the convicted rapist trying to talk to you, but from these government agencies and stuff.
A letter in the mail from. It's not. The funny thing is, it's not even my first letter from jail. It's like my third or fourth, and every person who sent me a letter from jail so far has been a murderer, at least.
Why? Why?
I don't know.
How do they even hear about you in jail? I think you were saying that I was watching, I swear, in that one they said that they don't have access to internet.
I've been on so many like documentaries and stuff that, everything, like PBS or like all this stuff, So even if they just give them access to like the most basic, like generic learning channels or something like that, they probably run into me. Or like I've been in so many magazines, like Scientific American and all this stuff that like even the most generic stuff, there's a chance that they've heard about me. Why they contact me instead of somebody else, I don't know. Maybe they feel more connected to me because I tend to be more iconoclastic and countercultural. And they think they have a better chance with me than like writing a letter to a Harvard professor.
Depends on the professor.
But it's hard. It's definitely, I try to keep my personal life very personal, and don't really talk much about it. Don't really post much on social media about it and stuff like that. But it's definitely hard. People definitely shown up to my place of business and stuff like that, just randomly, because my company is the address is listed. People can find it online and people just show up sometimes. And you just kind of have to, it's generally not everybody who's shown up has been crazy, but generally it's not normal people who just show up at your place of business randomly either.
Yeah. some survivorship bias there in terms of the type of people that are finding you.
Yeah.
So, but in general, like I haven't heard of you being swatted, for instance. So like you're generally, this is something I worry about.
It might be difficult to find my address. I mean, I'm sure if you paid money on one of those search services or something, you might be able to, but.
Yeah, but at the same time, I bet it's so easy. It's not worth anyone who's listening who's an asshole to even look into it at all. Like, sometimes they're like people who don't have social cues and can pick up on the fact that I'm saying something here that
I get called.
Would take the challenge.
Like, I got called yesterday. Somebody called I don't even know how they got my personal phone number, and I was like, generally I don't answer phone calls, but sometimes when they're like, they seem, not in the middle of the day, right? Which is spam usually, or if it's like an area code nearby where I live, then I assume maybe it's like some business trying to get a hold of me that we're working with or something. But generally I don't answer calls, but I did. And this person just started like questioning me about shit. And I was just like, all right, hang up. Sorry.
Yeah.
It is. You really do kind of have to separate yourself a bit from these things. But I don't fear for my safety. I think most of the stuff I do doesn't anger people that much. It more, so I'm okay right now, I think, but I've definitely set up security cameras at my home and place business that monitor everything. So,
And you have armed guards for anyone listening.
Yeah.
I saw them. They totally exist. So
armed
anyone
guards
would be
attack dog.
Yeah, and your place of business is like 10,000 feet in the air. It has a physical location, but that's like where the elevator is. So no one can really get you. Yeah. Do you have any desire to experiment with psilocybin? I've been researching more about this, like in terms of like affecting PTSD and stuff.
Yeah. Oh, well, myself.
Or as a research project.
I think that's a little, I don't want to say outside the scope of what I do, but I think that's something that's more useful in like a clinical trial like setting, because the effects of something like psilocybin or similar drugs, which I totally believe can help people. Like, I think it's easy to be biased on something like that, where it's like, ooh, I feel better, right? It's like, it's not really like scientific in any way. Mm-hmm. And so for something like that, I feel like it's better to have professionals set up, controlled clinical trials or something in which they can determine how helpful these things actually are for people, that face PTSD or depression or things like that. So for me, it's more, that's less like pushing the boundaries of something and more like, it just needs resources. And like, I'm not going to contribute to that in any way by doing psilocybin and being like, it healed me, like people are just going to be like, yeah, you're just a fucking mushhead,
Yeah, you can find the dancing elves. Apparently there's elves on there or something. I hear it's good, like particularly if you're like dying. Apparently it helps you with your death, like coming to terms with it. So that's probably the only context I'll take it in. Like if I were to experiment. I'm a very boring person. I do not do drugs or drink. Yeah. My doctors love me. So like I'll take that box at the end of my life. Yeah. Whenever that comes. I think that's the paradigm. But I thought, maybe you're more courageous than me. So I could have you try it and then tell me if it's any good. Are you hey, you're my guinea pig. Yeah. It's like there's in paragliding.
I think enough people have done it that like, I don't.
Yeah, but I don't know them.
Need to like, yes,
I have a control.
You need a personal recommendation.
Well, it's like I have now a control variable of who you are, and so if you take it and it's like the next time I see you, your hair's all in the air or something like that, and you can't complete sentences, then I know, like, you know what, It's anecdotal, but I don't think this is the right thing for me. Yeah. Are you gonna be? Are you setting up your? Are you reading anything interesting right now? Would be a better way of asking the question.
Yeah. I'm working on a couple things that I think are interesting. Well, right now, I'm trying to move more towards, artistic stuff, more artistic expression of stuff, and perhaps less sciencey stuff. But the one project I've been really interested in working on is one of the big problems with artificial wombs and getting embryos and other things to live outside of the human body is oxygenation.
Yeah.
Right now, what they do is they usually put it in a vessel and apply high pressure oxygen to it to try to force it into the tissue. But this doesn't work really well, and it's currently one of the reasons why we have trouble getting embryos to live past certain times. So I've been doing a lot of research into artificial bloods and molecules that can carry oxygen better than hemoglobin, that are much smaller, can penetrate deeper into tissues, and can oxygenate things a lot better. And it's a really interesting area because there's been some wild stuff done that's just kind of been never really approved for medical use. So I don't know if you've ever seen or heard of the movie Abyss, and there's a scene where they flood the person's suit with this liquid.
Yeah, it's like red or something.
And they've actually done that before with mice. They've taken these artificial bloods and that can hold oxygen and taken mice and anesthetize them and put them in these liquids for hours, right? Hours. Because the oxygen in the liquid can diffuse into their tissues and keep them alive. And so understanding this and how it affects cells and growing cells is something I've been experimenting with. And its many use cases in, embryo artificial wombs and growing things in bioreactors and things like that. And even human, using artificial bloods in humans. I'm surprised it's not more popular than, what the scientific research shows. And it's just because regulations and government has really pushed back against it. And so you have this whole area of research where it's ripe for somebody that's usually where I like to go, is where there's like scientific data on it, but research was inhibited in some way because risks are required, or people didn't have the experience to take disparate fields and bring them together.
So you couldn't just like put it in a petri dish and have like some dialysis system going on? Like it doesn't just like absorb it in? Is there like a technical term for why it doesn't just aerate in?
Oxygen?
Yeah, to the
why oxygen doesn't diffuse into the tissues?
Yeah, is there like a scientific? I'm saying this for anyone who's scientific listening who'd be like, oh, I know how to help you with this. Also, I have no idea.
Getting oxygen. So generally, when you're in a liquid, oxygen is only going to enter through the surface. So you have to get it. You have to get it further. Usually, they do mixing and stuff like that, right? But even then, getting large amounts of oxygen in liquid can be difficult. Just because, most of the liquid is water, right?
Yeah.
Makes sense. So creating these liquids that are filled with these molecules that can carry the oxygen, right? And get it to diffuse deeper in the tissue. Just have a higher concentration of these molecules and oxygen in the liquid, can be very helpful to, obviously oxygenating the tissue, right?
Yeah.
Like you could literally replace your blood. Well, not completely, because your blood has other stuff within it. But they've put like large quantities of some of this stuff in human beings. And yeah, it's it oxygenates like 5 times better than hemoglobin, or carries 5 times more oxygen than hemoglobin.
So, but it's the membrane itself that's caused the problem. If you get the oxygen inside the cell, it'll be happy as a clam. But it's the fact that you can't get through the membrane at a high enough rate to keep the egg and all these other things alive.
Yeah, and it's also just like diffusion deep inside, right? Mm-hmm. It's like the concentration of oxygen as you get deeper into. So it's like you have to think of it like, I don't know, like a sieve or something like that, right? Getting the oxygen deep inside the tissue is much more difficult, just by having the oxygen diffuse itself.
Yeah, and normally it's just the umbilical cord that does all that work.
So usually it's just blood, right?
Oh, okay.
But when you have an artificial embryo, doesn't have a circulatory system attached to an organism that's pumping oxygenated blood into it, right?
Okay.
So you need to provide this like artificial blood in some way, right?
Yeah.
Until like it can breathe on its own, which is like much, much later in the embryo's life.
How many more? I know we're coming up on time, so I'll try to like keep my questions down. But how many days? Like how long do you have to keep it alive before like kind of like kickstarts and keeps going on its own?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't think anybody necessarily knows. I think so. Mice, I think the embryos are usually functional, I think, around 24 days.
Okay.
They can survive outside the womb around 24 days, mice. And I think they've gotten up to like 17 or 18 days. With human embryos, obviously, there's no like record because technically you're not allowed to let them live past like 12 days. But yeah, no, a chicken egg is an interesting example, and it's something that I'm not completely clear how eggs survive so well, and I don't know if it's just generally when they form, inside of the egg has like, I don't even know, the terminology here, the egg sac or whatever. If you look at pictures, there's blood vessel formation.
Yeah,
maybe the surface area of the egg sac or whatever allows oxygen to diffuse into these veins.
The shell also has little tiny holes.
Yeah, but it's interesting how eggs can survive just fine outside of, but mammalian species don't use eggs except for what, the platypus maybe.
Yeah, those platypus is basically God giving Jesus his first job, and it's only the spare parts bin that he gets to pull from. Like that thing is a weird monstrosity. But okay, then are you good at math?
Yeah. I don't know. Compared to who?
Well, do you enjoy math? Just in terms of yourself?
Oh, no. I mean, I've done, my PhD is in molecular biophysics, and so I had to do some very complex math and stuff for my PhD.
Okay.
But do I enjoy it? Is something I want to do, or like?
Oh no, I was just about to draw a bunch of parallels. So the Washington inoculated his army from I think it was smallpox or measles or something like that before it was allowed, like before it was approved. So you kind of have that going in terms of your vaccine. You were out before anyone else, and he was doing it in a time where everybody hated that idea. And then if you were more enjoying of math, I was going to point out that you're kind of like Leonardo da Vinci in the sense that like he was cutting open people, and the church was like, if they found out, they were going to burn him at the stake. So
Yeah.
so like you got that in common too. Like
I
you're
don't
doing
want to
something.
be burned at the stake. Shit.
Well,
you know?
we don't do that
I don't know
anymore.
if I'm that.
Outside of Utah, we don't do that anymore.
I'm that courageous.
Yeah,
God
I
bless.
think it's interesting. Yeah, I think it's interesting
True.
parallels. But yeah, there's a book by Walter Isaacson on Da Vinci. You might like it.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have any
Right
books
on.
that you'd recommend for us, other than to subscribe to your Substack?
Subscribe to my Substack, Amateur Gods. My favorite books are probably Neuromancer by William Gibson. Station 11. I think it was a TV show.
Yeah, TV show is even better than the book. I read the book and the TV show.
I like them both. I thought they were both great.
Well, the Station 11, the TV show, just really elevated it. Well, especially the fact that
It was
they
really
meet up
good,
at the end. They made me cry when they got to see each other again. In the book, he just goes off and lives a happy life.
Yeah.
And then the son just dies. Like, he's just an evil cult leader. There's some redemption in there for him. I thought it was more of a beautiful ending. I also liked how they used Shakespeare to tell multiple themes. Yeah, it was fun. I really liked that series. My wife hates me talking about it because I go on for a while. She was so tired of it. She did not like it. I thought it was
really
great.
Liked it, also.
Yeah. They made it under COVID too. Like that, that the filming happened while pandemic was happening. So they really were feeling it. It wasn't even acting then. They just went to work and transferred their feelings.
Yeah.
But please continue.
That was
I'm sorry.
a good one. What other ones I'm a fan of some classic literature, Steinbeck.
Like Mice and Men?
Oh, Steinbeck. No, I mean, that's what people generally have read by Steinbeck, but I think
I read
Dubious
the Wrath one.
Battle is a really good book by Steinbeck. And Haruki Murakami. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's a Japanese author.
Norwegian Wood?
Yeah, he's written a lot of like surrealistic fiction books, which are just crazy and cerebral and always have a disappointing ending.
It's like life. We all die
He's
eventually.
one of those people who just like every time he ends a book, you just don't feel happy. You're just like, you didn't give me enough information, or like
I hear of Flowers of Aragon or whatever it's like
people
that.
die or something. You're just like, come on, Algernon, I think.
Yeah, that feels right. There's an author who only does that, and I don't ever want to.
Let me see.
Check it out.
I just started reading paper books again because then I get off my phone more.
That stuff's addicting.
But I was listening to audiobooks for a while, and so most of the books I've read. A really good one is The Midnight Library. That was a really good one that I loved. By Matt Haig.
Matt Haig.
Yeah, it's just interesting, crazy, beautiful. I don't know. Generally I'm into sci-fi and or autobiographies.
Do you like biographies, or do they have to be autobiographies?
Autobiographies usually, because I want to hear it from the person's point of view, not somebody else's.
Yeah, you might like Grant's autobiography. I'm literally about to read it. I read the Chernow documentary. I mean, a book, and I went from thinking Grant was kind of a boring, useless person to learn about, to like, I like this guy. He's so nice. He got a slave and he immediately freed it. He was just such a cool guy. Yeah, like he beat up Lee a lot, and Lee was just a little dick the entire time. I like that guy. How often does someone just like beat up those like when the South, they made up reasons why they couldn't have slaves anymore? Like there's a term for it where they still thought themselves as victorious even though they lost. I don't know. I'm gonna call them sore losers clubs, but like they did the KKK and stuff. Like what he did with Reconstruction. I don't know. He's a really cool guy. I'd recommend the autobiography. Yeah. He wrote it. He wrote it in like 2 weeks with cancer, and he had no money for his family when he was about to die. So Mark Twain worked out a deal so that he would get as long as he did a good biography, that I'm trying to like concise this because I know we're going over it. Yeah. Basically, he died 2 days after he finished the autobiography, and then like 2 weeks later, or like when the book came out, Mark Twain walked over and handed his wife $1 million check, and they were poor at that point. Yeah, it's so beautiful, and apparently it's really good. So I'm looking forward to that. On your left arm, is that the scar from? That's your right arm. That one, yeah. Is the tattoo the scar from Princess Mononoke?
Yeah. The demon that
Yes.
Ashitaka has in his arm.
Yeah. It was well, I was just gonna ask and then ask you how do you want to be remembered by, but is there? I'll just jump to this one because we're like way over the time. What do you want to be remembered for?
Being a loving person.
Well, that's hard.
Yeah.
You're so mean.
Well, no, I mean, it's just I'm
joking.
not really
I'm sorry.
Somebody, no, it's fine. I'm just not somebody who really thinks much about being remembered. It's not something that concerns me too much. I would rather just my kids and my family and people close to me, that I was able to, love them a lot and be a source of love and safety and stability in their lives. Because like all this other shit, like whatever, it goes away, it disappears. It's, if people remember me after I'm dead, what does it do for me? Like, I don't care. I would rather that the people I love, get something from me. And I think love is one of those crazy things that like it's valued so little in our world, yet it's like it's such a scarce resource, and I think it should be valued way higher than it actually is.
Yeah, and people are really alone nowadays. Like people just feel like they really don't, like the majority of their lives they don't feel any love. So that'd be a good way to be remembered, or for if anyone's listening to be inspired to like reach out and be vulnerable and find love, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing,
Thank you for joining us today with the Learn with Lowell show. Check us out at learnwithlowell.com. Anywhere podcasts can be found, subscribe. Tell me what you thought of this episode. Check us out on YouTube in particular. That's a new thing I'm doing. Timestamps and links are in the show notes. Thank you for coming, and I hope every one of you found something today that you're curious about to learn more about, and you'll go out and be curious and learn something new. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.